Oh, I don't want to record it yet, but I am going to forget to record, and then I want you to have the opportunity to play back this workshop. So as we get started, we're going to, because this is a beginner workshop, I'm going to treat you all like you've just started painting, and maybe for some of you that will be a little bit of a refresher course, and maybe you're experienced enough that you think it will all be, you know, the same old stuff, and maybe I'll say something that will turn on a light bulb for you. It's funny how sometimes that just happens when you're learning from someone new. You get a little piece of different information. I'm going to give an overview of supplies and materials, and I'm going to talk about why I don't give a specific color list, and give you some tips for choosing colors for this project and for future projects. We're going to talk a little bit about working with reference photos, and how to have the most success when you're choosing a photo and trying to capture that in your painting. We're going to then break down the process of actually painting a landscape scene the way I do it. And I love this technique because it gives you the opportunity to really elaborate on a good foundation. And I think this can be really crucial if you're wanting to develop your own personal style, because when I was first learning to paint and choosing landscape subjects, I almost would draw my scene like a coloring book page where everything's kind of outlined, and then all you have to do is kind of paint by number style, fill in each shape. And that always locked me into the original drawing. And so by working with a foundation that is more painterly, I guess would maybe be the phrase to describe it, we have options for changing things up as we go, bringing in a little bit of personality and play. And I love that. And then as we wrap up, we'll talk about evaluating your work, figuring out, is my painting finished? What does it need? And some strategies for making that decision. And then there will, of course, as I've said, be lots of time for questions. And because this is my first Zoom workshop in this format, I really have no idea how long this is going to take. We're going to fill the 2 hours. Don't worry about that. And if the painting gets finished early, then we'll just build on whatever we're focusing on and what your questions are. So I kind of like the fact that we get to be a little bit flexible here as I share what I've learned, and then you get to interact with that. So this is going to be a lot of fun. Like I mentioned earlier, please do keep your microphone muted when you're not asking a question. Stephanie will be watching the chat for your questions. And when you, what was the last thing I was going to say? And I'm going to do my very best to allow time for you to paint along with me. This is a recorded workshop, so if you're finding that you're struggling to keep up and watch the screen, by all means, take a deep breath, put your paintbrush down, and just enjoy watching. Plan to set aside some time to come back and watch when you can pause the video and keep up with me, because everybody paints at different speeds. Even experienced painters find that that's the case. I'll paint with people who have been painting for years, and I'm still blazing away through many paintings while they're working more slowly and methodically, and both ways result in beautiful paintings. So that's just to keep in mind. Just before I start with our supply look, I'm just going to quickly check my email, and I see one person that is having trouble getting in. Okay, now we're going to start. I think we're doing pretty good if I've only got one person who did not get the email that they needed on time. So, okay, so let's switch. I'm going to switch my camera over, and I have a camera over my work surface. I'll just pull that into place, and you can see why I have it out of the way, because I don't want to spend the whole session talking through a camera. And unfortunately, because of the way this camera is set, I'm probably not going to stick my head over my painting and leave it so that none of you can actually see what I'm painting. So that's also a victory. In your course materials, there is the reference photo I'm working from, and I have a copy of it here for myself as well. I absolutely love this photo. And the more I look at it, the more I like it. Now, here on my screen, it's not going to be as crisp as it is in this course curriculum. And I kind of like that, because whenever I choose a reference photo, I really like to try to think about simplifying it before I think about all the details. And so having it a little bit blurry on my from a printout to the camera to the screen means that I get to have a little more simplified scene. I can't see those fine details. The paper I am working on today is 9 by 12 inches. And I just noticed that the watermark of the Arche brand is down in the corner here. So I'm going to just turn my paper so that it's not upside down in my finished painting. I don't cut the watermark off. It's that little textured mark that shows who the manufacturer is. I leave it on the painting, and I've noticed that a lot of other professional artists, we don't want to waste paper, so we just paint right over it, and it kind of floats up through the painting, and nobody cares. So I do really feel strongly about painting on the 100% cotton paper. I talked about this during watercolor boot camp. It's just such a responsive paper to the flow of water and the flow of paint. And so I do try with all of my paintings to work on 100% cotton paper. And I know this is hard if you're a budget conscious artist. And if you've bought a big pad of cheaper cellulose blend paper, it's got wood pulp and cotton, or maybe it's only wood pulp, do go ahead and use what you have. Don't feel like it's garbage and you just can't use it. But be aware that because the response of paint and paper or paint and water are different, you're going to develop ways of working with cheaper paper, strategies for making it work that are going to feel different when you go to 100% cotton paper. And you'll also find that if you're trying to go back and forth between cheap paper and the really good stuff, then every time you paint, you have to shift your strategy and your techniques based on what paper you're using. So you actually make it a little bit harder for yourself to learn to paint. And so that's why I stress using the good stuff. It makes learning to paint in watercolor so much easier. And, we work with what we can afford. What I would suggest is if you feel like cotton paper is outside of your budget, if it feels like it's going to be really hard to justify the cost of cotton paper, give yourself a paper budget. Say, I'm going to spend X dollars a month and buy as much paper as you think you can afford for that month, and just see how long it takes you to use it up. Maybe it actually is a month's supply and you can afford the cotton paper. Paper is the biggest expense in watercolor, because once you've invested in your paints and your brushes, they last a long time. So it's really just paper that keeps us running back to the store. And unfortunately, paper prices have gone up. I was just shopping, looking for paper today. I wanted to buy one of those big rolls of watercolor paper, and it's, I think, half again as much as it was the last time I bought it. So I'm going to have to bite the bullet and place that big order, but I'm not looking forward to it. Regarding color, like I said, I do not emphasize particular colors for when you're new to we're taking one of these classes with me, because I'd really like you to learn to get to know your own colors and to be able to choose colors that are similar to mine without feeling like you can only use the same colors as me. So I just want to talk about a little breakdown in choosing colors, and I think we'll use a sketchbook to kind of take a look at some of those color comparisons. One thing you want to think about when you're working with watercolor paint is that all of this paint started out originally as pigment. When I was in Italy, I went to a little shop called Arcobaleno in Venice. It was absolutely just the most fun experience. And I bought some pigment, and this is probably going to make powder all over the place, but you can see this is a pigment that you can use to make paint. And it came with little instructions on how to mix it with different substances to make oil paint or acrylic. Well, actually, I'm not sure if it gave instructions for acrylic paint. I think it did. And for watercolor. So with watercolor, you mix it with a little bit of, I think it was water and gum arabic, and with a palette knife, and you mix it until it's really smooth and the right consistency, and you have watercolor paint. And I feel like it's a lot grainier than what I actually would buy in the tube. But whenever I'm working with paint, I try to remember that it started out like this, as these fine grains of powder, because it affects how, it affects my knowledge of the paint, I guess. So when you're working with paint, we get to choose the consistency we work with. And I'm going to just choose a red here. And when I think about red in watercolor, as you look at your palette, think about having a red in your palette that is maybe a true red. This one's kind of I would say maybe a lipstick red. It's got a little bit of a bluish tinge to it. In fact, it probably makes purple really easily if I mix it with the blue. Whereas if I have an orangey red, and I don't in this palette actually, I have an orange, but an orangey red is going to be more tomatoey. And you can see that there's quite a difference between those two. This one is closer to maybe a magenta, which is kind of the pinky color you would see in a printer cartridge. So when I'm choosing reds, I often talk about choosing a warm red or a cool red. And a warm red tends to be one that's a little closer to tomato, very bright. And we tend to think about that as the true red. And then a cool red tends to be closer to a magenta. Alizarin crimson qualifies as that as well. Interestingly, if you're choosing a red to mix a color, like I said, this one would make a really nice purple. You want to choose a red that's closer to a pink, because it will probably make a nicer purple. So that's the purple I get if I mix this blue. But if I mix it with this, you can see how muddy that purple is. So it really makes a difference. And so I like to think about those pinky reds as really good mixing reds. I can actually take a pinky red like this, and I can mix it with a yellow. And I can actually get something that's maybe a little more red, closer to a tomato red. Like that looks more like a true red. So you can actually do a lot with this kind of pinky red, even if you don't have this tomatoey red in your palette. And that's why I don't have it in this travel palette. So being able to know whether your colors, in this case, red, pink, magenta, is warm or cool, is going to help you make choices as you watch me paint. So if I'm choosing a red, you can ask yourself, is it closer to tomato or closer to pink? Is Angela mixing with it to make a different color? In that case, I've probably chosen a pinky red, like a magenta or an alizarin crimson. So that's red. When it comes to yellow, I do something similar. I like to have a warm yellow and a cool yellow in my palette. And actually, this palette is really interesting. Should clean it a little bit first. With my travel palette, I do try to keep a versatile color mixture. So I have this lovely kind of school bus yellow, and I think about that as a warm yellow. It's got a little hint of orange in it. And when I was little, my parents used to argue about whether school buses were yellow or orange. And then this yellow is a little more close to a true yellow. That's Nicolezo yellow. And this color looks like something similar to what I would find in a printer cartridge. So that's going to be a good yellow for mixing. And then I actually like to keep an earthy yellow in my palette as well, like a raw sienna. And that one's really nice for mixing for earth tones. So generally when I'm thinking about yellow, if you're watching me paint with yellow, ask yourself if it's a kind of true yellow or if it's maybe a little closer to orange, or maybe a little bit brownish even. The other yellow I have in my palette isn't labeled as yellow at all, and that's this one. You can see I'm dipping into green, and this is green gold. And I would actually, if you dilute this and add some water to it, it suddenly really starts to look like yellow, with just a tinge of blue, which is what would make it a pale green. And so I think of green gold when it's diluted, I think of it as a yellow. And it's pretty, it's just a little greener than a lemony yellow. So it's yellow comes in so many different names. It's one of the most confusing, I think. In my big palette, I have this one is a benzimidazoline yellow. That's a fancy name. And then I've got a bunch of these other kind of, this one's called bright yellow green, and it's almost a highlighter color. And then I have these different golds. I have quinacridone gold, and I have some other earthy yellows. And I just find that, you know, the most I need really is a yellow that mixes well. It's nice to have a green that dilutes to be kind of a yellow. And it's nice to have something that's a little bit earthy. Even this one, which is a lot of fun to work with, isn't really necessary because I could add a little bit of red to this kind of true yellow. So I kind of just look at my yellows with that in mind. And then finally, we'll look at blue just quickly. And when it comes to blue, actually we'll go over here first and go to cobalt blue, which is a pretty common color you might find in your palette already. That's cobalt blue. One that's very similar to it is ultramarine blue. And I think mine's almost gone in here, so it's just a little bit, I don't know if that's earthier or something, probably because it's almost empty. So those we think of kind of as a true blue, but when it comes to mixing colors, I don't think they're the easiest color to mix. These are actually called warm blues. Thinking here, yeah, because they're pretty close to purple. So if I were to put a purple beside them, I think this is a good purple. You can kind of see that there's a progression here where these colors do look good together. They're kind of alongside each other like cousins. And so because it's close to purple, they make actually, you know, I can mix them with some of this pink maybe. Oops, where'd my pink go? My magenta. And I might get, it's not very much magenta. So there's always adjusting when you're mixing color. Oh, and so you can see how easily that shifts to purple. But if I were to try to mix these particular blues, and again, not enough paint on my brush, those little pigment granules. If I'm going to try to make a green with that particular blue, and we'll use this yellow to make green. It's a nice green actually, but it's pretty subdued. If it's not going to be ever a really intense bright green, I can add more blue and more yellow to try to get it darker and less diluted, but you can see it's still kind of a subdued, kind of shadowy green. If I really want an intense kind of green by mixing blue and yellow, I want to think again about my printer cartridge and try to choose a blue that looks more like something that would be in a printer cartridge. That's that purer, cleaner color. And when I mix that with my Nicolazo yellow, pop goes the weasel. It's a very bright green. So, and I didn't say the color of purple because I'm actually not 100% sure I like that shade of purple. So often I use dioxazine violet is probably my most intense purple. But I really like mixing color and I like noticing what color does. It seems like we tend to, I tended in the early days when I was learning to paint, I tended to do a lot of mixing in my palette. And that's the other thing I'd want to point out right now is as I was mixing, I was choosing a color and then choosing my second color and I was mixing them right on the paper. And the reason I do that is if I choose this yellow and then I choose my blue and I start mixing it here, in order to get this color to mix, I need to add water. And it's going to be very hard to get a rich, dark version of this color. It works well to get a diluted color, but you can see that this is going to be paler than this mixture. And so when I mix it in my palette, or on my paper rather, I can use a little less water because I can just, move those colors around together right on the page. But when I'm mixing it here, I do find my brush is wetter, and then I have to transfer it over to here without it drying here. And so the color generally tends to be lighter. So as I'm painting today, I'm going to be discussing, maybe you want to choose, suggesting that we choose, a true yellow, I might say, and I'm going to be talking about something like this. I'm going to also be showing you how to do some of this color mixing on the paper, and as well, because we're painting a landscape with a lot of green in it, how to make your greens more interesting. It's actually, I haven't showed you a green today because it's a lot of fun to mix greens. I have some convenience greens in my palette. You can see this is all green in this section, but I always like to kind of dance with mixing color a little bit, so those greens change as I paint. And it's amazing how you can do that even with just these two colors that we mixed here, this yellow. I'll go over here. We're just all over the page today. And I can add a little bit of that blue to it and start to move it across the page. And maybe even a little more blue over here, give us a bit of a shadow. Add a little more yellow and that changes it up. Actually, that yellow really wants to take over. So we just can, and then maybe in my painting, I've got also some of my pink. Maybe I bring in some of that into my paint, into my green as well. And that gives my color another dimension as well. So we're going to be talking about using color all over the page. If you've got it in one spot, you plan to use it as a mixing color as well. So any colors about questions about color before we move on to talking about looking at our reference photo and trying to get it down onto into our sketchbook. Okay, I will move on then. Okay, so my reference photo has vanished on me again. I'm trying to keep my space open. Oh, here we go. Okay, so when you work with, I mentioned that I want to not do a coloring book approach to drawing my subject onto my paper. I don't want to have to just fill in the blanks while I'm painting, but I do want to make the painting process easier. Freddie's asking, do I use some dark colors like gray or black? I do not have gray or black in my palette, Freddie. Let me actually show that to you. I don't know if I have any black nearby because I don't use black. I try to avoid it. There are some near blacks that I have in my palette. This color goes down quite dark, but it's actually a really dark blue. And it actually, this one, as it dries, dries lighter. So it's dark right now, but it's going to get a lot lighter. There's a violet that I really like. And it's kind of a murky violet color called Moon Glow. But if you really want a beautiful dark that's near to black, with watercolor, it tends to work best if you mix it yourself. And one of my favorite ways to mix a black would be to take this particular, or take a red. So I'm choosing this true red over here. I'm going to add, I think, this color to it. This is a phthalo turquoise. And you can see how dark that got on my palette immediately. And that's actually given me a very, very, very dark purplish black. If I wanted it to be a little less purple, I can add some yellow to it. And then I get something that's pretty close to black. And the reason we do that is, and I'll show you how to mix a nice gray as well. The reason we do this is because with watercolor, the light in watercolor, the glow that watercolor has that is so beautiful, that draws most of us to paint in watercolor, comes from the white of our paper. We're not using white paint. And when I use white paint in a painting, it tends to look chalky because it doesn't match the color of the paper. So I want that luminous quality to come through. And black, true black, has a light absorbing quality to it. So rather than reflecting light like the beautiful white paper does, anywhere I've used black paint absorbs light, and it really feels kind of flat in my painting. So I love using a mixed black where I'm taking a red and a green. Usually are my favorite is to mix a red and a green, or in this case, the red and that dark turquoise worked as well, especially because I added a little bit of yellow to make my turquoise a bit greener, and that gave me this beautiful black. So you're mixing two colors that are complementary and two colors that are also quite dark on their own. To make a beautiful gray then, I can dilute this black and add some water to it. And you can see I've got this lovely purpley black or purpley gray there. And another favorite gray that I make is with the cobalt blue. I learned this from a watercolor instructor in my hometown, Marjorie, and she, once she taught me how to make this gray, there was no stopping me. I made it every day. Where did my burnt umber go? So a burnt umber, which is a brown, it's kind of a warm brown. Burnt sienna will work as well. I can mix that with cobalt blue to make a gray. And the nice thing about gray is it can be kind of a brownish gray by adding a little extra burnt umber, or it can be a cool gray and you just vary your proportion of cobalt blue. And that's an amazing color for clouds, the shadows on clouds. So now I've got all kinds of colors for you to play with. And if you're playing with mixing color, a really good way to do that is just make some squares on your paper, wet the square, and just start dropping color in and notice what it does. Some of these colors that I've mixed are doing really interesting things as they dry. Can you see the different textures and colors right there? And right here where I mixed kind of a violet, this red and this blue interact really interestingly to make, it's a violet, but it's got little red streaks in it, and the edges are a little bit darker. And so the colors themselves in watercolor really feel alive as they dry, because just those different tiny variations will come out. And I really believe that our goal as artists should be, let's make a painting that's beautiful from a distance, so people want to come closer and look at it. And when they get closer, that's when they start to see all of these magical, delicate effects that happen. And so we want to draw them in. We want to make a painting that, sure, it's interesting from a distance, but the magic is in getting closer and seeing watercolor's beautiful sense of nuance. So, looking at our reference photo, wanting to avoid our coloring book approach means we have to think about the photo and how do we get it down on the paper. And there's a couple of different approaches that we can use. If you're really nervous about painting on a blank piece of paper, you might want to use transfer paper to get your drawing onto your painting. What I don't want to do is take a piece of beautiful, expensive watercolor paper. Like I said, the price is going up. I don't want to take my pencil and try to draw my reference photo onto my paper. If I make a mistake while I'm drawing, I have to erase it. If I have to press on it with an eraser, I'm going to disturb this delicate surface of the paper, and it's just not going to paint as beautifully. And so I want to keep my paper as nice as possible until I start painting. So I'd rather do my drawing on a piece of, in a sketchbook, and then transfer it. So I've drawn a very quick sketch, and I've actually used it a couple times in just preparing for this workshop. And that's the nice thing about drawing in your sketchbook as well, is you end up with something that you can use over and over again and really develop your subject. You really get to know it and try different colors. And if it doesn't turn out the first time, you still have a drawing that you can work with. Do notice that my drawing is not very complicated. I've made it very clear to really strengthen the shape of the tree, which I really feel is my focal point. And I've drawn out the size of my paper. So I have the same size as I'm going to be painting. And that's really helpful because sometimes your reference photo, the proportions are not quite the same as your painting paper. And so the placement of your elements can be a little bit off. And if I start, in fact, you can see in this photograph, between the photograph and the drawing, my tree is a little bit lower on the page than in my photograph. I think on the photograph, my knot hole is like up here, a little higher, and there's just a little more space in this area. And I didn't do that, but I think my drawing still works. So I don't have to worry about precision as much as just noticing whether or not this works. Because we are painters, not pencil artists, we want to think about major shapes. And so my first process here, if I'm studying my reference, and actually let's just do that. I'm going to set that aside, and we're going to quickly just sketch it small and try to pay attention to our major shapes. And I don't always do this when I'm painting. Sometimes I really like to go straight into my painting practice, trying to make it into a painting. And so often I end up backtracking and wanting to go back and figure out where I went wrong with my placement of all my elements. So in this case, I'm going to look for, I'm going to divide my painting into kind of 3 or 4 different sections. I've got my tree, that's one section. And it kind of connects to the land that's coming up along the creek. So we might think of that as an extension of the tree, and think about all of this tree roots, this bush here and this rock as one thing. We have a beautiful golden background of leaves here, and it kind of comes across to here. And then we have our water. So that would give us kind of 3 major sections. So if I were sketching just a small version of that, I'm going to look for how that depicts itself if I really, really simplified. And I might end up with something like that. And, I can paint a painting with only that information. The key there is to try to notice where things fit together. So I've got that tree kind of coming down here. That's the most important part. I see that dark knot hole, which I really like. So I want to make sure that goes in a place that I like it. And then I have a bunch of dark shadows down here at the base of the tree. So we can make that really dark. We could make more dark shadows here where the tree roots are kind of a muddle with leaves in front of them. And then we also have a dark shadow coming here where the water is. So we might want to place that to help show where this rock comes down. So even though this is very small, it can start to give me a feel for my scene. The tree itself, if I squint at my reference photo, and squinting is a really helpful tool, I see a dark shadow coming down the back of my tree here that makes it darker than the leaves behind it. So I know I want to push that golden glow so that my tree looks dark and solid. And then there's kind of trees here, and there's trees in the background. And right now, everything's kind of a mass of green and yellow. And I don't have to think about what's in front or what's behind. If I squint at my reference photo, kind of look at it blurry, gives me a lot of, it really simplifies. There's the dark shadows I really see here. There's kind of a dark shadow here where the creek and the grass meet. So I'll put that in as well. And then maybe a little more dark shadow there. And this is a little darker here too. And so now I have something, I call this a thumbnail sketch. It's also kind of an understanding of the major shapes in the photograph. And it gives me a third understanding of the values, the light and dark patterns in my painting. The values, the range of light to dark, and their contrasts in your painting, that's the key to making watercolor work well, not whether or not you have a good outline drawing. So when it comes to this sketch here, I actually have a lot of that happening as well. I've taken a little more time with it. And because I've actually sketched it on onto two other paintings, some of the major lines are really dark because I've used this, I've gone over it with my pencil a couple of times. But while we're looking at it right now, I want you to notice some of the same things are happening. There's that dark shadow here that matches the dark shadow there. Dark shadows here, they're not quite as dark, but it's still the same idea. There's this shadow here, this little line here. This really helps. It's a little line, but it really helps us to understand that back here we have a division between land and water. And actually looking at it through my camera screen, it's really, you can really see that dark shadow and you don't see the rocks so much, which is good because I don't want to paint all those rocks. That seems boring to me. And then I kind of had a little bit of fun with some line. I drew a thing that could be a bush here. I drew some shapes that could be masses of trees or bushes over here. And I drew this kind of shadow here as well. But I really paid attention here where that tree shadow is and those shadows on my tree. So I've got a similar map. It's just a larger scale to fit the size of my painting. Now I can, I've been painting long enough that I can paint this, paint using this information without actually drawing anything on my paper. But for your benefit, I think we will actually put some lines on this piece of paper. And I have a question about my sketchbook. I use all kinds of different drawing books. This one I just found on a shelf and grabbed it. And it's just a Strathmore drawing paper. Hanamula makes some really nice sketchbooks as well. And I try to keep, in fact, probably the next time I order a sketchbook, it'll probably be one of the Hanamula ones because I really like the paper. And it's actually cotton as well. I've actually painted in watercolor on this paper. It ripples a little bit, but it was kind of a fun exercise. Okay, so I want to just demonstrate quickly, try to be quick, how to get your drawing, once you've drawn it, down onto your painting surface. Again, we don't want any pencil lines that we have to try to hide, and we don't want any pencil lines we have to erase. So I'm going to start by just talking about transfer paper briefly. I have two kinds of transfer paper here. And these two are the same brand. It's just I've had this so long that they've changed their packaging. And transfer paper is really nice because you can use it over and over again. And then I have this one, it's a Mona Lisa brand. This one I don't like as much. It's made by Speedball, actually. I don't like it as much because it's a black transfer paper. And so I have to be really careful not to press too hard with my pencil, or it will make lines that are too dark to cover with watercolor. I prefer a gray transfer paper, and I really like this yellow transfer paper because it puts such a light, pale line on your painting. And you only want to have those lines as guides. You don't really want them to be visible. Transfer paper and graphite paper are the same thing. Carbon paper is different. If you have carbon paper is a wax-based product. It has like a wax or an oil in it. And so it doesn't like watercolor. Wax will resist watercolor. It won't flow nicely over the lines that you've sketched. And so we want to look for graphite paper or transfer paper. In fact, it says right here on the label that it's waxless, smudge proof, and it won't bleed through paint. So they know you're going to use it for your paintings. This particular piece of transfer paper, you see that I've used it many times. I think I can probably get one more use out of it. We'll give it a try. And we'll place our drawing right over the paper we want to paint with. Probably would have been better if I hadn't taped my picture down first, but today I'm actually a little more prepared than usual. And I'm going to tape it in place. Sorry, folks, I just bumped that with my head. I'm going to tape it in place so that if I wiggle the paper, it doesn't ruin my drawing. And then I'm going to carefully place my transfer paper, transfer side down. Now, if you do not have transfer paper, you do not have to despair. You can still transfer your drawing to your painting surface. You just have to make your own transfer paper. And you can do that by covering a scrap sheet of paper with a thin layer of graphite, the same stuff as is in your pencil. Let me find a pencil here. All my pencils have vanished. This is almost a pencil. So if you have a pencil, you can cover the back of your drawing or a separate sheet of paper with a thin layer of graphite. So in this case, I have, I could just cover the back of my drawing, going over it like that. And then once it's evenly covered, and again, if you use scrap paper or a piece of printer paper, you can reuse it just like I do. And then once that's done, you can use it the same as I'm going to demonstrate with the transfer paper. So it's something to keep in mind. Because transfer paper is not that easy to find in my small town that doesn't have an art supply store. So I'm going to cut, I really want to get my tree down. So I'm going to carefully, semi-carefully draw a little rough, irregular line. I want to depict my rock, get that placed. I want a shoreline here and maybe here to tell me where stuff is. I think I can probably remember where this shadow is, but we'll stick it in anyhow. Maybe a little curve here. This line matters. We'll draw that one in too, why not? And then maybe a little bit of a line here to show me that there's some shadows happening there. Actually my transfer paper doesn't go all the way across the page, so I have to move it when I start to move over to this side of the painting. There's a bit of a line there where the reflections change. A line here where the grass meets the shore. A line here where the grass meets the trees. And then I'm going to quickly check. See if anything's missing. No, I think we're good. So even though this drawing has a lot of lines in it, I'm going to keep it nearby so I can glance at it as I paint. Sometimes a simple drawing like this is actually easier to follow than a photograph. So I bounce around between looking at my photo, looking at my drawing, and then also paying attention to my painting. In fact, sometimes the easiest thing to simplify, especially in the early stages, is to keep your eyes on that thumbnail sketch. So this foundational approach means that we want those major shapes in place. The major shapes that tell us where the dark shadows are, where the light highlights might be. We especially want to think about, so I'm just going to put my transfer hood away really noisily. So we really want to think about where those dark shadows are, where the bright colors are, the light highlights, that beautiful golden light of the leaves. And of course, that beautiful dominant tree, which is kind of what the painting's all about. In my reference photo, you can see, again, the golden, I really feel like the golden leaves are the key to this painting, because the contrast of that with the kind of grayish neutral of the tree, that's going to create some really beautiful contrast. We've got dark shadows that are going to create some beautiful contrast that make that tree stand out. And then our golden leaves are reflected in our water down below here. And I don't have as much room in this painting for water as I could have left. In fact, I have a photograph of this same scene with more water in it. And I ended up choosing this one. I feel like every time I get a little bit closer to my main subject, I end up with a stronger painting. So this, we're going to just start by, we've drawn those major shapes. Now we're going to paint those major shapes. Now, the challenge with this 2-hour workshop is that it is hard to keep up with me, and I apologize for that. I'm speedy, and I want to give you as much information to help you build a painting as I can. I was trying to decide if building a painting like this is it like being a carpenter or is it like being a seamstress? Those are the questions I was asking myself today. I was thinking, if my husband's a carpenter and if he's building, he doesn't think about the finishing work very much. He knows what the outcome's going to look like, but he has to build a strong foundation for that finishing work to land on. You know, he has to put things in the right place. He has to measure carefully. And we want to do the same thing. We want to get the major factors in place so that we can do the finishing work later and have that go well. So the strong foundation really helps with that. Now, if I was a seamstress, sometimes you put in some of those details. I was thinking about, you know, adding trim to a dress or something. And I sewed a little bit when my girls were little. And so sometimes you have to plan ahead and pin things into place so that when you go to finish later, you'll have all those little bits of trim and stuff already sewn in. But you're always working with the biggest shapes and doing a little bit of planning for the future. And we want to do that today as well. So because I'm thinking about my major shapes, I think I'm going to paint I'm debating. I think I'm going to start by painting my yellow background leaves first. Often painting the background works just a little bit better. I'm going to use a large brush. At this stage, I want to use a big brush. Not super crazy. I have this, and that's just too much. The thing I don't like about this brush is it holds so much water that it's quite sloppy, and you end up flooding your paper with too much water. So a big round brush is going to work just fine. And because my leaves are in sunlight, they're also in shadow a little bit. And there's probably some different trees represented. There's a little mixture of greens in there as well. So I'm going to try to make my yellow background leaves interesting, even at this early stage. And yeah, let's just give it a try. So a juicy brush, I've rinsed it. I've dipped it in my water. You can see it just dripped on my palette, so it's quite moist. And I have a puddle in my palette of yellow. And we know that this puddle, because whenever I mix in my palette, it gets quite diluted. We know it's not a very dark color. It's quite watery. And at this stage of the painting, we do want to dilute our color more. If I tried to fill this part of the painting with thick color, it's mostly it's mostly paint and just a little water. That's not going to be a very receptive surface to layering more color later. Diluted washes of color are a really nice way to start. Also, you can see how dark this color is. We don't want to be that dark this early in the painting. We're thinking about our major goal being establishing early shapes and placing all the elements into the scene. So I'm going to use that juicy brush and just move that color around. It's too dark, so we're going to spread it out with some water. And I'm going to dip into my water container and just, pull out more. And look how much yellow that was. It was enough to cover this whole section. That is just so much. One shade of yellow is pretty flat. So let's add just a hint of, let's add a little bit of this orangey yellow. Or if you don't have an orangey yellow in your palette, grab a tiny bit of red and mix it into your puddle over here. Give yourself a nice little pop of kind of orange. And I'm just going to wiggle that right across in a diagonal shape right here. And kind of blend it in a little bit. I'm just going to tilt it in some different directions so you can kind of see what's going on there. And then I'm going to look at my reference photo again. This is all kind of yellow, then it kind of shades to green. And I think we can put a tiny bit of green in here as well. Let's use some of that green I mixed earlier. I can't remember what that mixture was. I think it was this verditer blue, just a blue. And let's use the same yellow we've been using. And then we end up with a little bit of a green that we can put in. It's going to stop at this line, but there's a bush over here, so we're actually going to bring it down in front of our tree as well. And while I'm painting, I'm always thinking about my edges. And I want to just give you a second to notice this. Right now I have a crisp line here, and it kind of goes along at a right angle. Nothing in my actual photo is that crisp, is it? So I don't want to keep anything that crisp. So I'm going to actually use a wet brush and take that line away and just soften everything so it's kind of spreads out and fades away. Up here where my tree is in front of my background leaves, I can get away with having a crisp line there, but I don't want that where my water and my landscape meet. I want to have some options. And at this stage of the painting, I try to keep everything very soft. So I'm thinking about my drying time. I'm also thinking about the fact that I want the yellows on this side to match this side. So let's put some yellow on in this little corner. And I'm not super careful with my edge of my tree. Oh, that's too much orange. Add some water, wiggle it around. I am overlapping some of those little lines. I don't know if you can see that, but it doesn't have to be perfect. And then my reference photo, the yellow leaves actually come in front of the tree. So I'm actually going to let some of the yellow flow down, right down the page and blend in. And I'll be able to add some layers there in a minute. So we have yellow background. We have a little bit of green that could be grasses. And I also want to think about the yellows in my stream. And it's interesting when we try not to, I guess one thing I would say is maybe try not to label the objects in your painting. Here where the water is, it's really easy to say, okay, that's water. And water we know is blue, but this water is not blue. If we look at our reference photo, it's all kinds of colors actually. There's a reflection back here. There's the golden reflections here. And then there's this dark kind of muddy patch as well. And there's all kinds of like little bits of color all throughout. So I want to kind of think about the overall color of the water at this stage. And it's really reflecting what's happening in the environment around it. A lot of yellow reflecting. So we're just going to use a juicy wet brush and paint, fill that in with some yellow. This dark shadow I'm not going to worry about yet. It can happen. Dark colors can go in later, but I do want to have that gorgeous glow. And I want to keep it that same kind of, what did I say? Tea kind of consistency of diluted color so that it runs really beautifully and smoothly. I see people asking about my brush. It is a number 12 round from Princeton. It's just, it's a synthetic brush, and it's just one that I've used off and on. Any big round brush will perform very similarly. I think it would be interesting as we start to, right now, looking at my painting, all of the painting is covered in color right now, except for my tree and my rock. So we want to start thinking about the tree and the rock. And I've saved them for last because I want my background to be a little bit dry, maybe not all the way dry, but mostly dry, so that I can put that tree into place without all of my tree colors bleeding into my painting. Because I am establishing early shapes right now, everything else is soft. And we have, Joe, I see your question and I'll try to answer it here in just a moment. So everything else right now is soft. We have colors bleeding into other colors. And I have worked with a lot of moisture so that I can move that color around. And that's been varying degrees of successful. There's an edge right here where my water was, it was wetter here than here. And so anytime a wet color pushes against a drying color, you're going to get a bit of an edge. In this landscape subject, I like that. I want to have texture in my painting. And the same thing here. The green was wet. Here, the green was not as wet. So we have another edge where two different levels of moisture push up against each other. If you want things to dry smoothly, paying attention to that balance of moisture is really a learned skill that will happen over time. I have a very dry climate, so things dry quickly for me. Even though it's cold here, I'm working at room temperature in a very dry room. And so I do have to, anytime I travel to a different climate, there's always a strategy of figuring out how things are going to dry. If I'm painting outdoors, the same thing. I have to adjust my working speed sometimes, or how much moisture is on my brush. So often as I'm painting, and this is a process and you will become more comfortable with it as you continue to paint. As I'm painting, I'm modifying how much water is on my brush based on what part of the painting it's going to touch and what that part of the painting needs. So my cobalt blue and my burnt umber have been sitting over here in that little gray puddle that I made earlier. And I kind of like the idea of maybe using that for my tree. I feel like the background of my tree is a neutral color. I have used lavender for it before, which I think is to me, lavender feels a lot like a gray, but I think we can probably use this gray, since we've already mixed it, to create a tree shape. So I'm going to draw this line here, and then I'm going to draw out from the line with a wet brush and just move that color and spread it out a little bit. Over here, it's going to touch that yellow that was migrating onto the paper, and it's actually still a tiny bit damp. If you are struggling with things drying quickly, try working with, one thing you're going to want to try having maybe more moisture on your paper, have more moisture on your brush, and just see how that affects your painting process. Sometimes we overcompensate and everything becomes just a pool of water. We don't want that either. So one thing that often happens is if your climate is quite dry, I'm out of the gray, so I have to mix a little more quickly. But if your climate is quite dry, sometimes what happens is that first brush stroke really soaks into the painting, and you have to come back and add a little more. Go in with a second brush stroke and build up that moisture. So that's one thing that I do. I think people don't always notice when I'm teaching that I've added maybe a second stroke to compensate for any paint that got quickly absorbed into my painting. So this time I mixed a little more of that gray, and then I made it a little bit darker, a little less water in it, a little more paint. And we're just going to place that in place. There's a bit of a shadow over here. We'll maybe suggest that with the side of the brush. And maybe a little bit more in there too. And you can see it kind of soak into the painting. And this is a first layer. This is really probably all that I need to establish those first foundational shapes. But I can go a little bit further too. Maybe I want to look for some of my shadow colors. Over here where the water gets very, very dark, we can create a reminder that there's dark shadows there. And I almost wonder if I can just use this dirty color in my palette. It's kind of a bunch of colors that haven't been used yet. And the wonderful thing about watercolor is you can reuse your palette dirt, re-wet it, and place it. So this kind of makes a dark, dark green. And I'm going to drop that in. Where my rock is, there's a dark line of shadow. So I'm going to put that in. And it's really important, I think, right now to try to keep my shapes very simple and not be tempted to want to paint all of those little reflections. So I'm just going to place that dark shadow there. And look at the difference that makes. That one little pop of shadow tells me that there's a shadow there, tells me that there's depth in the water, and makes this rock already feels like it has a personality. I'm going to drop in a little bit of a shadow over here too. And I'm doing that because I'm going to move over to a second layer in just a moment, and my second layer actually has that. So I'm just trying to plan ahead. And that dark muddy green that was in my palette would be a good shadow color on this side of the tree as well. So let's put that in there. And right now, can you see also that I'm holding my brush, I'm pressing it flat. Rather, I'm not drawing leaves or bushes with the point of my brush. Instead, I'm using the side of my brush to mash it, kind of mash it into the painting and make a big shape. Later, we'll make those shapes actually look like what they are. So yes, good question, Freddie. I am getting an edge below the rock, and I'm going to keep that there. We do have a lot of soft things happening where things are flowing together, but we have a few edges that are happening as well. Very crisp along the tree trunk. We want that. We want the tree to have its own identity. And this very crisp line as well gives us a real strong sense of division between water and land, where that rock is coming into the water. And I think that's going to be a good information cue for anybody looking at my painting. They will see something's changing here. There's a change in direction. This line I'm not so sure about, so I think we can adjust that. And I'm just going to use a damp brush to take that crisp line away and wiggle it a little bit. And I try because this is a first layer of a new painting, this is a good time to stop and let it dry completely, because I have accomplished the goals for the first stage of this painting. And we're going to give you a few minutes to catch up and ask some questions. My goals for this first layer were to establish major shapes and major color patterns. You can see the beautiful golden light was a priority, and also the placement of my shadows. And somewhere I put my notes. I want to make sure I cover all the things in your download in the course curriculum. You can print off this little guide for what to look for at this foundational stage. We've also established that there is light and dark values in this painting. They're not as strong as they're going to be. In fact, I didn't paint my shadow colors in the tree trunk at all. They're pretty, it looks pretty flat. But you know, I've really got an idea of where my shadows are, where my light is, and where my most important shapes are, my tree, my water, and my bushes kind of moving us through the painting. And that's really what I wanted to establish. So that's a good first layer for me. It gives me groundwork for building form and making things have some depth and dimension, which is what happens in the second layer. But I want to let my painting dry completely before I move to that second layer. One thing I would mention is, as I grow as an artist, as you grow as an artist, you might find that you don't have to walk away at this stage. Sometimes what happens is, as I'm painting, this section might still be damp, but up here it's dried and it's ready for me to start building up some form. So sometimes I don't stop but I still am moving into the second, kind of the second phase of the painting, that idea of developing form. Valerie's commenting regarding brushes. And it's always a challenge when it comes to supplies, everyone, because we come from different areas and different things. I don't know what's available in your region. So it is difficult to recommend materials. I often use Daniel Smith brand paints, but they're not available in every country. And so sometimes, or maybe they're very expensive. And so I really do try to talk about color families and brush types and varieties rather than getting into specific brands, just because of the fact that I haven't tried everything. I don't know what's available for you, what's good in your area. And so I know what I've used, and it's actually probably a very narrow range. I haven't tried that many different products. I'm trying. I like to try new products, but definitely it is it's always a challenge to try to recommend something that is widely available. Princeton is a well-known brand, and they make a very nice student grade brush. This particular one I'm using today because it is one I would recommend. It's the type of brush I think a lot of new painters have. A synthetic brush. It comes to a nice point, so you get all kinds of nice shapes with it. You can use it to draw lines as well as fill large areas with color. And it's large enough to hold quite a lot of paint and water. So it's a brush I like for that. I also have brushes from Escoda. This is a synthetic, but it's made to be a little bit softer. And so this is actually one of my favorite brushes as well. So they are linked on my, I think both of these brushes are linked on my website if you do a look for my recommended supplies. And yeah, Stephanie tracked it down. She's popped it in the chat. Okay. And I often order my brushes online as well. There's nothing available in my hometown. Jackson's Art has often very good deals and a huge range of brushes available, even though they are in Europe. They have, I think it's free shipping over like $75 or something. I can't remember. Everything's changing over the last couple of years with the cost of shipping going up and the cost of materials going up. So I try not to quote prices because who knows what it's going to be tomorrow, right? As this is drying, this is a good time to take a break and walk away. When we're painting, we can get so focused that sometimes I'm almost painting a reference photo as though I'm a typewriter or a scanner or something, where I'm I'm moving across the scene back and forth and wanting to paint every detail. And that's not going to really make my painting have Angela life to it. I want my painting to be a little more than just me trying to catch every detail in my photograph. So that's why we're looking at this idea of painting from those major shapes. I'm going to take a drink of water, and then I'll talk about this idea of seeing those larger shapes, looking for those value patterns. We want to continue as we started. And just as I started by, drawing that simplified little thumbnail, I want to keep working in those big shapes, noticing those large shifts in color and value. And then as we move deeper into the painting, we could think about the finishing work. Okay. Because we are, so when I do a painting like this, I tend to paint for 15-20 minutes, and then I go paint on something else, or I take a break. I go get a drink, I stretch my legs. I want to come back and view the next stage with a fresh perspective. So now is a really good time for you to stretch, look around, shake your neck out maybe. I know when I'm painting, I have to pay attention to my body. How does my back feel? How does my neck feel? Change my posture, move around a bit. And then I'm ready to come back and move into the next stage. Here's another here's another version of the same scene. And this is the same idea, painting those major establishing shapes. But look at how much softer and looser this one is. We're actually going to be working on this one next. I don't want to have to wait for this to dry before we keep going because we are on a time constraint. So I'm going to move straight over to this one while yours is drying, and I'll walk you through the next stage. Just do notice though, this is very different, like a lot less detail here. And I can still use this. And the reason I can still use this for this painting, for this subject, is because everything is soft. When things run together the way they do in these versions, and this one is a little less so, but I might come back to this and show you a little bit about adjusting some of those edges. But when it's this soft, we have the ability to build lines over top of it. But as soon as you have lines like this, there's a little, you're locked in a little bit to those shapes. And both ways will work, but they give us different information to work with. On this one, I'm still going to need to establish where that rock touches the water, what the actual shape of the tree is. And so that's the next phase. So I tried, I didn't really try to make them match, but it's the same process. We're going to build form into this subject as we move into phase 2. So how do I now make this look like a tree in the landscape that my reference photo tells me that it's in? And I'm thinking I should tape it down because we will be using a bit of water still. If you're working with mostly a dry brush, you don't really need to tape your paper down. The reason we tape it is so that it doesn't buckle when it gets really wet. So if it's not going to get wet, you don't have to worry about it too much. The board I have is called, in my area, it's a corrugated plastic. It's a Coroplast or Coroplast. And I just bought it at the hardware store. But if you go to a sign shop, sometimes they'll have scraps they can sell you. And it's really easy to cut down. It's lightweight and it's waterproof. So it's really nice for me because I do travel quite a lot and I can bring several of these along on a trip, and it doesn't put extra weight in my luggage. And customs agents don't seem to mind seeing it in my suitcase. So my husband had once built me one out of wood and it was so heavy. Okay, so I've taped my paper down, and now we're going to move into thinking about creating form. And so what I want to do first of all is remember the colors that I started with. So when you come back to your first layer, the colors you will be using belong to this first painting. You can bring in fresh color, add little pops of additional color, but these are your base colors that you start with. So that first yellow you used, you're going to continue to use it as you move through the painting. That green is the same thing. And because I was using this puddle of what I like to call palette dirt, I'm going to still use the palette dirt. And if I start to run out, I will add to it and top it up, but it's still going to be this, it's still going to have a little bit of that original color in it as well. So, and I am running low on my blue gray again. So we're going to start by just getting that color ready, because I think we'll start by focusing on the tree. Phase 2, moving into defining form on our tree. So I'm going to mix a nice puddle of that gray. Right now it's a little heavier on the brown, so you can see how it does look quite brownish. I'll add a little more blue to it. Maybe a little more yet. And it is quite dark. I can add a little water and just make it a little bit paler. I want still a little more blue. And so I'm going to start by just finding the edge of this side of the tree. And even though some of the yellow has crept into the tree trunk, I can still create a line here right over top. And then I'm just going to use a damp brush and soften that shadow out a little bit. My tree is very, very textured, but I don't have to think about the texture right now. That's for final detail stage. So I'm just thinking about kind of darkening up this one edge. And now that it's wet, I can touch in a little bit more of my shadow color, and it's going to bleed in like that. And look at how an instant 3-dimension happens on that left side of the tree. It's just that easy. And the key here is that form comes from value. We make something look 3-dimensional by paying attention to the light and shadow on that object, and darkening the shadows, creating more contrast with the sunlit areas. All of those things help us to create that form. I can also think about that dark knot hole and maybe drop in. And you can see right now, I put in a dark shape, so it's got a dark hole, but it looks very flat and pasted on because we need some context. We need that gradual connection that anchors it into. So I'm going to soften it and blend it into the tree. And then it's going to have to dry, and then I'll probably add a little bit more shadow into it. So that makes it look more natural, but it's still a little confusing there. So that's fine. That's something I can do later on. So I have this idea of I'm adding some details, but I'm also figuring out how to connect them to my to what I've already painted, which is all very, very soft. And then over in my reference photo, there's actually a shadow that this shadow comes here. And then there's another shadow right here. And there's a little edge, a little bright edge along that knot hole. So I want to pay attention to that. Let's see if we can't paint that little bright edge. So again, way too flat and dark. And then with a damp brush, I can move color around. And you can take your time with this, be really careful and timid about it even, because this is something you can build up gradually, and you can even take a long time doing it. You can have some very, very subtle shadows and then keep adding tiny details. Here's an example. As this is drying, if I want to add more texture, I can draw some lines maybe that make it look like the tree bark. I feel like it looks like it's long strips coming down. And then with a damp brush, I can go back over those lines and make them a little bit softer. And then I still have line coming down, but it looks a little more, there's a little more depth there, and it's blended into the shadow. And then once this is dry, I can go in again and maybe I do even a few more really crisp lines. There's just it can be this really kind of meditative process. Because this is wet, I can drop in something that looks like a soft shadow. Over here, there's a bit of a shadow that goes off behind the leaves. So yeah, I'm just continuing with my damp brush to soften everything. And this is something I would really encourage you to have fun with. It was one of my favorite things to do when I was a new painter, was to, well, let's do it on this side of the tree as well. Draw a line. In this case, I'm using the cobalt blue and the burnt umber mixture. So I just drew a nice line there. That's too crisp. It's a little too dominant. So then you can take your damp brush, just a tiny bit of water on it, and soften that edge. And so we have an edge, but then it very delicately blends into the tree on the opposite side. And I love that process. It's so meditative. And I'm going to come closer so you can see the texture in the tree trunk. And that's that combination of drawing a line and then adding a little water to soften it. And I almost feel like I had a phobia of lines when I was a new painter, because I would put a line down and then I would instantly like soften it, go and panic and blend it in. And even now, years later, I still prefer this softness of things that flow together. I'm amazed at how quickly our time is speeding by. There's just so much to this beautiful meditative process of painting in watercolor. So we're thinking about creating dimension in our tree, and painting dimension in the rest of the scene is the same thing. This time, I want to think about, we're going to try to move outward from the tree. And one reason I would do that is because if this is the most important part of the painting, this is the thing I want everyone to look at first, then it should be the most interesting part of the painting. It should be the thing we spend the most time on, that we invest our time of detail and dimension with. So and then the rest of the painting can be soft and delicate. It doesn't need to have a lot of detail. If we look at our drawing again, let me find it. I keep moving things to be out of the way and then I find them again. So remember, our original drawing gives us that dark shadow that's in here. I want to use that. And I want to use the shadows that's in here. And I really want that finishing. This is where the creek kind of stops and disappears around the corner. So we want to make sure we get those in the painting. Those are priorities. So let's look at this shadow. First of all, this is a shadow in the bushes. So is it going to be the same gray that we've been working with? That might be a little bit monotonous. If our tree's gray and then this is gray, how are people going to know what they're looking at? Let's see if we can't make an interesting shadow that will work with those original greens we mixed. So here's my green. And I use that combination of blue and yellow. And if I want to make a green look more shadowed, we want to add its complement, the color that's opposite of it on the color wheel. So I think adding a tiny bit of red might give us a bit of a shadow to our green. That's a lot of red. It also, however, unfortunately makes my green look brown. So that's not a great color for shadow. If I add a little more blue, maybe that will work. We're going to mess with it and just see what we can find. And let's try that. It's not going to, oh yeah, that might work. It's very dark. So let's put the dark shadow here. And it kind of, it's kind of hard to tell where that shadow wants to stop. It's dark, dark, dark. And then we've got lots of leaves and stuff. So I think I'm probably still going to be my usual timid self and use that softening technique to keep this from looking, you can see it looks very flat. Yes, there definitely, the recording is your tool, folks. You get to come back to this painting tutorial as many times as you want. And I would really encourage you to do so. As you can see, I've painted this subject more than once, probably 5 or 6 times in the last week. And I've enjoyed every version and I've learned something new every time. So it's not the beginner way is that you paint something many times. It's a good way. It's my favorite way. It's what teaches me the most. And it gives me the opportunity to change up my colors, which I'm doing a bit today. I kind of like that shape, actually. What do you think? I'm going to make a line here. I'm supposed to have a rock in this spot and it's vanished. We're going to see if we can't still put a rock there, even though the colors aren't right. You just never know until you try. And then as I move away from the bushes on this side, I'm going to go back to my tree color, because in here we've got tree roots. And so maybe the shadows become a little closer to the shadows I used for this edge of the tree. And I'm going to try to, and the thing is right now, and this is the scariest part, because I feel like we see all of the leaves and we think, oh dear, I have to try to paint the yellow leaves that are in front of the shadows, and I have to try to figure out what goes where. And we're just going to blend everything in. And we're going to continue to do that. So I just took some yellow and I just brought it into that shadow area. I'm also going to put some green down there. This is not the favorite green that I've used for this painting, but it is still a nice earthy green. I think it works. So we're going to just mix some of those colors in together. And then we're going to do the same moving up on this side. Let's bring some of this green. And then I don't really want to have a lot of difference between my background and my foreground. So I'm going to actually disappear some of the colors that I've been working with. Let's just use a lot of water. The main priority right now is, how do I make my tree pop forward? How do I make my shadows help my scene look dimensional? Those are the priorities. And so I want to look at my tree trunk again right now and figure out if the shape I've painted is working. And right now, I think I want a little bit of some kind of line here to show where the edge of the tree is. So let's just go a little bit darker right here. There, that little shape right there. Do you see how that makes the tree pop forward? Yeah, Stephanie's talking about Monet, how he painted his haystacks about 30 times in a year. I hadn't heard that. I knew he painted the haystacks at least 100 times overall. I think the water lily paintings were like, he has like 250 of them. Okay, so I'm thinking about my rock. We talked about that rock. I want it to be in my painting. So I'm going to try to make it work here. We're going to paint that line that I painted in the last version. It wasn't in this one, so I'm going to paint it in right now. And that's part of that idea of developing form. And I think one reason I love painting landscapes is because they can be very forgiving. Nobody's going to look at this tree and say, you know, I know that tree was wider in real life. Oh, that knot hole should have been smaller. No one's going to say that, because, you know, trees vary. And this particular tree, nobody, you know, if you walked in the forest where I'd taken this photo, we probably still couldn't find it. So we get to have a little bit of liberty to make our subject work. One thing I'm noticing is this is really beautiful. Those little drops of color that I transitioned, I had my shadow green, and then I shifted over to my tree shadow color. They're both sitting here in the palette beside each other. And then I dropped in some of those greens and yellows that were in my background. And look how pretty that is together. Okay. So what's next? How do we build form into this painting next? What areas are troubling me that feel flat or they don't feel complete? So let's just study that. Yeah, Stephanie's commenting on a little bit of that yellow glow showing through our shadow here. And that's a really good insight, because even though I put a dark color over top, the color underneath shines through. That's the beauty of watercolor, is that luminosity, the transparency of the colors, and the way a color originally placed will glow up through the scene. That's why I have everything soft in our first layer. So as I build up those layers, the first colors I put down still matter. Moving into the next stage and thinking, or moving along with thinking about form rather, maybe I want to define my background a little bit. I also really, good question. I also really want to see this this line here where the grass and the creek meet. That's important to me. So I'm going to put that in right now. I think I'm going to maybe try changing my green slightly. And the reason that I would do that is so that my green here has its own distance from the viewer. Right now, this green that's in the front by the tree. And I want an interesting green for the background. So I'm going to just tap in a little bit of yellow. I've added a little bit of this phthalo blue turquoise. And so my shadow green has suddenly changed quite a bit. I'm going to add a tiny bit of this orange to it as well. And adding yellow to a green, it sometimes will make it, well, it'll make it warmer. It won't always make it brighter. If the green is quite dark to begin with, you can't, the way you make a color brighter is by adding water. So let's just add a line there and see what it does. Okay, so I want you to notice that a single line in the painting, look at how much impact that has. First of all, it bleeds away where it touched the wet paper on this side where I watered down that shadow as it moved up. But on this side, it gives us a break. It gives us a fence, a stopping place. So I'm going to, so that really helps my scene make sense. Landscapes kind of live by horizontal lines. This little line where we gave a stopping place for our rock to go, and this little line which gives us a stopping place where our creek stops and our land, our grasses start to come up. I'm going to use my little softening trick. And yeah, Joe says, I haven't used my spray bottle. I have not. We are painting with a little more control today. This whole step-by-step landscape development process, it just is a little bit, for me, a little bit slower, a little bit more brush dependent. I also wonder about putting some of these greens maybe over here. Let's put a little bit of green back here and see if that looks nice. And again, softening with the brush. Actually, I'm going to soften right there too. I think a bright orange leaf might look really nice coming down. We could do a nice little branch that is in front of the tree. So let's put a note on, a mental note for the detail stage, which we'll be moving into actually fairly soon. So what else looks flat? How do we make form in this painting? I think our background looks kind of flat. So let's make some depth happen there. And if I look at my reference photo again, we can see the green coming down along here. And this is a more distant yellow. And then this bush kind of beside the tree here, these little tree saplings or whatever they are that are green, they're in front of that background yellow too. So I do have several distances that are happening here. We have the grasses and the bushes, we have more distant trees, and then we have these near kind of greenish saplings. So I'm going to think about the fact that I have those three distances, and I'm going to hint at them. I'm going to make some symbols, I think, that will tell us things are near and far. So one way I'm going to do that is by creating a bit of a line here. This is going to be some nearer bushes. This is going to be some farther, those farther golden trees. So I'm covering that original yellow with just a little wash of further yellow. And then down here, I'm just going to perk up the green that I have here with a little something, something, just to change it up again. And then I'm going to go along this edge. Actually, and look at that little line that happened when I put some paint on there. I kind of like that too. Do you see how that line creates some more contour, some more depth in the scene? And then I don't like a line that's too bold, so maybe in a couple of spots, I'll get it a little bit wet. And now we have some different areas within this shape. Even though they're actually quite soft still, I'm starting to feel like there's some depth there. So I changed, I had warm color here and I added this little band of cooler color, this green, which is a bit cooler. And back here, I think I can do something pretty much the same thing. We'll work with that same orangey yellow. It dried a little bit light too, so I can now make it just a little bit brighter. Sorry, I should try not to thump so hard against my water containers. It probably gets picked up on the microphone really loud. And then that little bit of jazzy green. I want it to be kind of similar to this color, but if it's not perfectly similar, well, the tree's in the middle to kind of break up the shape. So, and then I softened it away. Now, does that give me a little bit of interest in the background? I think that kind of works. The other thing I can do, I might not be using my spray bottle, but I could try to add a little bit of spatter while the paper is wet and see if that maybe does something interesting there. I feel like it's a little bit too busy, actually. Sometimes if I spatter and it's too busy, then I just disappear a couple of them with my brush, blend those shapes a little bit, and then it works a little bit better. Still kind of freckled. But it's a good way to add some texture. And I also spattered on my tree trunk. So if you're going to use spatter, sometimes you want to be a little tidier than that. Okay, so how do I build form? That's the continuing question, because that's what phase 2 is about. I have a form of a rock that needs to happen, and I did not leave space for that rock the way I did in our first layer. So you can see here, the rock it's there, it's all worked out, but in this version, it's not. And I'm going to troubleshoot this version because I think that could be helpful for you. And I might dive back to the other one just to show you a little bit of strategy there as well. First thing I can try to do is maybe try to lighten up my rock a little bit. I can moisten it with a damp brush and fairly gently lift with my paper towel, just rubbing very, very gently. I don't want to go back and forth like this because that's not good for the paper. But blotting a little bit, pressing a bit, and I am dragging just a tiny bit. That did lighten my color a little bit. I can also even work back and forth with my brush, and that will sometimes loosen color once it's dry if you have an area that needs to be lighter. So that's helpful. And from there, then I can, drop in some of my blue-gray. It's damp right now, so that means if I drop in blue-gray, it's going to softly blend. So it's still dark, and we're going to have to troubleshoot how to help that stand out beside this dark shadow above it. On the other version, if I want to create some shadow, well, now it's just a matter of some form. It's just a matter of actually creating some actual shadows on the rock. So I draw some lines, and then the same as I did with my original tree, I soften with my brush. I'm blotting my brush on some paper towel right now so I can use it like a sponge and actually lift some color. And then I might go back and place a little bit of dark color. I actually really want this area to be dark where it touches the water. That's really going to help it to have form. And then here, where it touches the land, there's actually kind of a dark shadow there that actually moves up into the landscape. But notice how that alone just gives it some form. And then painting, if I paint a dark shadow behind the rock, that's going to help it pop forward as well. And so suddenly we have a shape that actually has a shape. And I want you to notice as well, when I'm building form on an object, sometimes that means painting around the object, behind it. And that can really help it pop forward and stand out. So back to this one, how do I build form? How do I create some depth? I have some depth in my tree. This edge is really working well. I'm happy with that. I think we want a little bit of form in our water. And I want to do some more form building in my shadows as well. Time is whizzing by. I'm gonna keep going until I get to a place where I feel like I've demonstrated all 3 stages. If you have to leave, because I know I said this was a 2-hour workshop, if you do have to go, this is all being recorded and it will all be included in your course curriculum. So you can come back and just pick up where you left off. Please do what works for you. Since we did talk about questions, I do want you to have the opportunity to ask questions. Why don't you go ahead and start asking them in the chat? And I'm going to build some shadows in this section here. Now look at that shape right there. And I'll take a look at what your questions are. That shape right there is really, really pretty. I feel like there's little shadows on that side of the painting or photograph that are like black holes with leaves in front of them. And I want to try to paint those, but if they don't work, because sometimes they don't, I feel like sometimes it's because this crisp shape does look very flat. And so sometimes it works better to paint that crisp shape and then again, soften pieces of it and let it blend in. I'm going to add a little bit of some of that bright orange too. And that might help those shadows to work better as well. Kind of pretty. And I always want to look at overall shapes. We are still working with those major shapes, the biggest things in the painting. I'm looking for patterns. This tree needs shadows, so it looks like it's hanging over the bank a bit. And the better my observation is, where are my shadows? How dark are they? What's around them? Those little flecks of orange aren't making me very happy, actually. I wonder if that doesn't, I don't know if that works better. The orange is so dark as well that it kind of disappears into the shadow. But I want to also think about simplifying. It's so easy, like I said, to want to move across the painting like it's a typewriter or like we're X-raying or scanning it or something. But looking for those major shapes just helps us to keep things simple. Where did my bird number go? Notice how much of this shadow color, the blue and the burnt umber I've used for this painting. It forms the foundation of everything that's a shadow in my scene, has some of those colors in it. what I'll often try to do is top it up as I go. I want to talk a little bit about this. Oh, that's kind of, how do you feel about that edge? I think it kind of looks like leaves to me, and I think that kind of might be a good strategy. I might just leave that just like that. And let's see if we can't, that might be a detail thing, but just that little edge there too reminds me that those are bushes. I'm going to go a little bit darker in the center of my tree hole there. And now I have 3 stages of darkness in this. I've got my lightest value, I've got that first shadow that I painted, and now I've got an even darker shadow. And that helps build up that form as well. And when I add that 3rd layer of darkness, sometimes that means other parts of the painting also want a little bit of a 3rd layer of value. Something like that might be helpful. And a 3rd layer right there. So it's a little bit of a back and forth process of adjusting. And I want you to notice how those crisp lines, they still work. I like the process of softening, but I don't think it's completely necessary. There's some really, really good artists out there who do a lot of painting with a lot of crisp line. So if that's something that you like the look of, you do not have to be a panic softener like me. Just putting that out there. We all want to do what feels like the most comfortable fit for us. Okay, that looks a little measles or something. Too many spots. So that's just adding that additional, darkening those values just a little bit more. I can also add more texture to my tree as well, but I think I need to hold off on that. I think that's the tendency that we often have to rush ahead and want to paint details when we're still establishing form. I want to focus on establishing form. So is there an area of my painting that looks flat? And I think one thing that will help is maybe thinking about my water reflections. Do I want there to be a few more reflections in my water? And I think I'll put a few in. A beautiful color for this is working with the green I mixed originally, but also recognizing that as it runs out, it changes a little bit, and that's okay too. That burnt umber looks really nice with this phthalo blue or phthalo turquoise. Yeah, it makes a beautiful deep green. So let's see if we can't deepen this shadow here a little bit. Make that water look a little darker in this area. And that's going to make my rocks pop forward a little bit. Maybe I might actually get a rock that works in that section of the painting. I would have probably been tempted if I hadn't promised you all a rock, I probably would have been tempted to just pretend there was no rock there if I was painting all by myself at home. But since you're here, I get to show you how to problem solve. Oh, that was really good. Okay, I want to show you this really carefully, quickly. Notice how I just went up and I came around here. Instead of just having the rock come straight across at the bottom, I ducked up and I gave it a little rounded shape right there. And I want you to notice that, because look at how that made that rock almost immediately round. Okay, Wendy, your great question. I think troubleshooting is something I'm happy to help you do. I ended up without any white showing through, and my paper is really buckling. Am I putting too much water on my brush or going over it too much? Will the buckles go away as it dries? My paper is buckling a bit as well. It's raised up here. It's puffy over here. This is a low spot right here. I do try to tilt my board a little bit so that excess moisture flows away. Sometimes if you're painting too flat with a lot of water, you're going to get that buckling. And so that's one thing that can help. Generally, I try, that is a process of that is part of the learning process, Wendy, though, is that you will be using sometimes too much water in one part of the painting, and then that area will be drying unevenly. So that might be one of the factors that's part of the problem there. As your painting dries, it should flatten out, and you will develop a better sense of how much water to use on the different parts of the painting. I don't like that line when I look through my camera screen. But what was I going to say with that? If your buckles don't go away after it's dried, what you can do is you can actually, with 100% cotton paper, it's cotton, so you can actually iron it and flatten it out. So I'm just painting some lines. Does that look like reflections on water? I'm using that same green that I was using over here. In some areas I've added water, so it's a little bit more diluted. And I'm just trying to kind of look for the patterns in the water, not every detail. And I'm not actually going to paint lines on the golden areas because I feel like they'll get heavy and dense looking, and I don't want that. So the shadow areas, those dark green ripples, I'm painting the ripples, but I'm not going to paint the reflections that I see in the yellow, because I know what that will do to my painting. It's just a learning strategy, is knowing that it will make my painting look muddy. I want to add form to my rock. I'm going to add a little bit of shadow to it, or a little bit of line to texturize it. And I'm going to just use my lavender. It's quick. And it's a little bit opaque, so it covers over some of that dark color while not being too dark itself. And let's add a little pop of orange to it, like maybe a leaf got caught in one of those crevices and cracks. I'm going to add a little bit of orange to the edge of my water as well, where there's kind of a little cluster of leaves that got trapped at the edge of the water. What else can help make my painting look like it has form? Let's just shift. Let's think about our detail stage. We are running out of time, but now is a really good time to think about details. And this is a long process. I feel like the detail stage, and this will be on your printout. Detail work means that you're doing less painting and more looking. I feel like at this stage of detail, I start to move my brush less, but I take longer. I'm evaluating more. I'm pausing to notice what's happening. I'm looking at my painting through my camera lens, and I'm taking breaks. I'm walking away and coming back. If I cannot visualize what the painting needs, I really try at this stage not to touch my painting. I have a working overall placement of all my elements. I'm getting that form of my tree is happening. And so I don't want to ruin it in the details by just being overzealous with my movements or my choices. So this is where I slow down. And I want to encourage you to do that as well. There's no urgency here about getting it right or finishing it on a deadline. Hopefully you're not working to a deadline. I cannot do it. If I have a deadline, I always freeze up and the painting doesn't work out. One thing I will also mention is at this stage, we tend to be using more paint and less water. So we're often working with darker colors because to paint those details, it means often we're just tweaking our value contrasts a little bit. If I want my rock to pop forward, right now it's kind of flat. It kind of blends into where the land comes. So I might choose a dark color to go behind my rock. And that makes the rock come forward. So often to make something work means I'm not painting the object itself, but I'm painting something near it. I'm also thinking about tidying up some of my edges. And so let's say over here, I've got a little bit of overlap sometimes between my yellow that's in the background and my tree trunk here. It's not well defined. And so now might be a good time to think about cleaning up an edge and just making it look a little bit stronger. So I might decide to do just a little bit of careful outlining. And then again, that damp, soft brush. Just pulling that down. And that helps this part of the tree to really pop forward against the background. Actually, it might be a good idea to do that over here too, where it's kind of hard to tell where the edge of the tree is and where the background shadows are. So maybe I draw a little bit of a line, making sure this area is completely dry. And even just drawing that line has actually really helped that part of the tree to be strong. But then up here, I want that line to blend in with the rest of the painting. So here it can be nice and strong, but up here, I just faded that away. And then I can think about maybe adding more texture. I can make my tree trunk look more rounded by painting some lines, some shadows here, and then slowly softening. So there's not a lot of difference between the building form and the adding detail, except for we tend to be using even smaller brush strokes and making fine adjustments. And that idea of the 3 layers of dark values that I was talking about over here, that's a part of that detail process as well. I'm often looking back and forth at my reference photo, but I'm also, one thing I noticed just now, look at how white that looks, that little edge beside my my tree hole. And here in my photo, it's not, it's bright, a little bright, but not as white. I almost see a bit of a brown there. And I wonder if I can't improve that so it doesn't look so much like there's a big spotlight shining on that part of the scene. Maybe a little bit of my burnt umber color mixed with a little bit of my gray and a mostly dry brush. If you have too much water, it's gonna be hard to control. And maybe that will just send that, make it blend in just a little bit better. And then I can have the tiniest bit of burnt umber on my brush and maybe add some little details with that color as well. Some little lines here, some tree bark. That's a big smudgy mark. I'll show them to you. So they're detail marks. And then let's just add a little bit of softening. Okay, question about how to find the class once it's done. Any course you purchase from me can be accessed at learn.angelafehr.com. When you visit my website, angelafehr.com, you will see a link to take you to your classes, or you can just type in learn.angelafehr.com and get there. And Yo-Marie or I are available in email, so that if you do have trouble finding it, we can set you up, send you a link again to that. It will probably take about a few hours for the video to process after Zoom is finished with it, and then to get it uploaded to the website. A 2-hour workshop video is a long video that takes a little bit of time to upload. So do keep that in mind. I'm also going to send you a link to my Learn Watercolor the Heart-Led Way course. We have covered so much information really rapidly today, and just continuing to add fine detail as I talk here. There's a little shadow here You can add a little mark for it and then soften it. So if you feel like there's been a lot covered today and you'd really like to go over it again and maybe in another with a different painting subject, I will be doing another Zoom workshop like this for beginners in March, and I'll be announcing the details of that very soon. I haven't set a date for that class yet. And I also have Learn Watercolor the Heart-Led Way, which is a course that has lots of beginner tutorials that can help you get all your watercolor questions answered and follow along with some really fun, loose and fluid exercises to help you develop your personal style and learn technique at the same time. So I'll send you a link with information about that if you're not in that course already. And if you have bought courses from me in the past and haven't visited them in a while, I'd sure encourage you to do that. They are all available at learn.angelafehr.com. If you are logged in and you click the My Courses button, you will see everything that you've purchased and be able to go through it anytime you want. So details, adding a little bit of grass over here might be fun. Flick upwards with my brush. They look very, very crisp. So once I've made some grass that, you know, looks kind of like little soldiers in a row, I soften. Joe, any blooms that you have, you can paint over them if you want to. The deal with blooms is, like I have an edge over here. They will, because watercolor is transparent, they will still show through, but you can make them a part of your painting. So a bloom like that works really well as a little bush or shrub in a landscape scene. And then I can decide that maybe I want to make a little edge that looks like more bushes over there. And then that hides it really well because it kind of blends it in. And you create a little irregular line, and that bloom just kind of disappears behind that little crookedy line. I have not painted a lot of background trees, but this would be a time when I want to think about whether or not any of those little tree branches should be in my painting, and I can play with learning to draw some interesting lines. Those are kind of pretty. And then maybe add some suggestions of some leaves that attach to those while they're wet. Keep it simple. And just break up that shape with a little bit of masses of leaves rather than having to paint individual leaves. And notice how that I kept my colors very pale there. They're not as dark as the shadows over here because I want those elements to be in the background. Maybe I have another tree over here, something like that. It's coming up out of these bushes. I've done every part of my painting today with one single paintbrush. You do not need a lot of brushes when you are learning to paint. If you have one brush that makes a nice round point and holds a lot of paint like this one, it really saves you a lot of time because you don't have to keep going back and forth grabbing different brushes. You're just all set. Well, that's kind of pretty. And then because now I've got these trees coming up out of the landscape, maybe I want this bush to be kind of in the front. So I might want to just go back over that with a little bit of a line. And even a wiggly line like that can just make those bushes work. But I'm going to soften it down below. Continue the same technique that I started at the beginning, painting an edge and then blending it into my painting a little bit. So now let's look at the scene. What's working, what's not, what might need to be changed. This is the part where I would probably take a break, walk away and say, you know what, I feel like I'm almost done. And I know from experience, hard experience, that almost done is generally often a time when I've kind of lost perspective. So often I've thought I was almost done a painting, And then I walked away and came back and I looked at it and I thought, you know, I'm really happy with this. Maybe it's finished. It's certainly a good time when we've done most of the painting is covered with paint. It's a really good time to take the tape off. Because that can help you have a little bit more perspective on how it looks, just to see it without that ugly border. And then, you know, step away, take a picture with your camera and look at it through that little viewfinder screen. That can be really helpful for helping you to see what's working and what's not. As I'm talking, I'm looking at the painting through my on my computer screen on the Zoom call. And that's really helpful because I'm seeing this shadow is so dominant and it really makes this tree pop forward and come alive. It's working really well. This rock, it's not my favorite. It's a little bit flat looking, but it also looks like a rock. So I'm not going to lose any sleep over it because my eye keeps coming up to this part of the painting. The rock isn't that important. These little trees, they have a lovely dancing feeling, and I like the way they give me something to look at in the background, but they're delicate enough that I come back to here. And so I really look for that ability to analyze my painting slowly, because there's nothing stopping me from coming back tomorrow and deciding I want to add more line to my tree trunks. And there's nothing stopping me from thinking that maybe the center of my tree needs to be a hair darker yet. I don't think I can actually get darker than what's in there. But you know, sometimes it's looking for those additional contrasts. This area, I want you to notice that, because I could have gotten very stressed out about that area of broken up shapes. Look at how much contrast between dark and light is there. But the reason this works is because the painting's about this. These broken up shapes, if I'd really given them all the attention and detail that they have here, I think they would have kind of been fighting with this dark, beautiful dark stuff that's going on there. Rather, this softness and this obscurity, it makes us move away. We don't have to spend time here, although it's pretty if you look at it closely. So I do think that there's a lot that's working here, and then I can decide if I feel like it needs more or not. But every little bit of more that I would add as I moved further in would be refining little details, taking this brush and saying, you know, maybe I need more attention to detail in my water ripples. I don't think I really do, but maybe I do. Maybe I want to paint some of those rocks over here in the background and have a little bit more going on where the creek and the grasses meet. So I do talk a lot about brush miles, Stephanie, you're right. I've painted this. Remember that I have painted this already 5 times in the last week and a half or so. So I very much know what's worked for me in the past. And I've had the privilege to come to this painting with that knowledge. And that's why I would suggest to you, as we wrap up this class, think about coming back to this video once it's uploaded. Think about coming back to it to give set aside 2 hours next week or tomorrow and just paint it again. Use the things that you'll be able to anticipate what I'm going to do, and you'll have an idea of maybe some changes you want to make to what you did today. And you'll have this additional knowledge to bring with you to the painting process. I get to make it look easy because I came with that additional knowledge. And every time you paint, you add to your toolbox of strategies that you can use for future paintings. The other thing you can do is print off the download. It's got a breakdown of what to focus on during the different stages of the painting process. So you can look at your own reference photos and use the same process to develop a painting. And again, paint it more than once and see how it works for you. So yes, interpreting the background, simplifying the background. I'm just going to switch the camera over and just have some finishing remarks, and I can answer further questions. I'm here for as long as you need me. So, but if you do have to go, thank you for being here. Do watch. I'll send an email when that recording's been uploaded to the course curriculum, and I'll send you a link to the curriculum as well, just in case you've lost it. So yes, I think in watercolor, and actually in every art discipline, I took a portrait class, and the insider knowledge that the portrait painter was giving, little things like, he said, whenever you're drawing a person, you should always make the pupils slightly larger than the photograph, like make them a little bit dilated, and it makes the person's gaze more approachable or something. And you don't learn that from good observation. If I had just been copying the photo exactly, even how you draw teeth in portrait painting is they simplify them very much so they don't look like they're skeletal grimaces. And so there's similar insider knowledge that comes when you're painting a landscape painting, or painting from a reference photo, learning from experience what to simplify, where to be soft and a little bit discreet with your details, and where to really focus your attention. And that is part of the process, and it is a skill you can develop. And I believe that working this strategy, that soft beginning and then building form and then building detail on top of form, it's a really helpful strategy, because there's so much room for your own personal style and your choices to come out in your painting. Now, I would love to see what you're painting, and we can, I wonder if we have a few minutes that we could do that. We have a small enough group that if you wanted to show something that you've painted, you could probably just stick your hand up, and I can take the spotlight off myself so that you could show us what you're working on. You have to be talking while you're holding it up, otherwise I won't see it though. Oh, Valerie, go ahead. Unmute yourself, and then I'll pop you up there. There we go. Okay, so here's Valerie's. Oh yeah, see, there's so much room to build detail and depth on that too. Absolutely. And your edges are absolutely gorgeous. So we really have some form that's come through those edges. Yeah.
I had a lot of trouble with the rock, and I need help building the detail. I don't know if you have any additional tips for the detail level.
Yeah, I think it is a slow process. When I was working on mine, and I'll show that one more time here. When I was working on mine, there it is again. One thing I felt like worked the best for me was that slow buildup in the center and on that knot hole, to do a kind of middle dark and then the darkest dark. And then I even went a little more darker onto it. So I think for yours, Valerie, one thing you could try is, I feel like there's a lot of really light value and then the really dark value. So it's almost like maybe working some of those in between, those middle values would be helpful.
Thank you. And I was the one that asked about the brushes. I don't necessarily need to know a brand, but if you could say specific shapes and sizes, that'd be super helpful.
Right. One thing that I've noticed that I really like is that these two brushes are both, they both are described as long round brushes. The Escoda Versatile is a number 10 rigger. So it's actually, rigger brushes tend to be traditionally, I don't know if I have an actual rigger. They're like round versions of this one. And so they tend to have much longer bristles. And I really like that because it holds a lot of paint. Again, Stephanie had posted a link to my basic supplies, and I do mention specific brushes by names on that webpage. Let's see, Wendy, I see your hand here. Let me just put you up on the screen here. There we go. Go ahead.
Okay, so I lost you. This is the very beginning, and yeah. I just need help knowing if I should continue.
Yeah, absolutely.
You see, yeah. It's so light and hardly any white. And I don't know. Can I keep trying to do what you did?
Yeah, absolutely. I would encourage you to work with that. Anytime you have something that's quite pale, you have the freedom to keep building on it. So you really can build up those further depths and get those rich saturations. What you might want to do is almost feel like you're in that first layer stage again, and then just build up those just a little bit darker, and then start working on form. That would be one way to go about it. The other thing is that when you have a beginning that's not going well, generally what I try to do is I like to think about maybe letting that painting teach me everything it can and continue to throw paint at it. Even if it's not going to turn out well, then at least I got a lot of brush miles. But the other thing is you really only have a few minutes invested. So there's no shame in starting over either. So you get to decide if your emotions are really defeated by what you're working on. Sometimes it is better for a fresh start and just that feeling of hope that you have. So it's kind of gauging, how do I feel? Am I willing to press on? Or would I feel like would it be helpful to me to feel like I had a fresh start? So those are two strategies for you.
Thank you.
Sherry, let me just stick you up on the spotlight here, if I can do that. Where did it go? Sorry, I've lost my setting here. I just need to figure it out. I think I need to. Why is this so hard for me all of a sudden? It was here and now it's not. I removed, no, okay, there we go. Okay, oh, Sherry, it's because your camera's not on. If you turn your camera on, then I can spotlight you. There we go, okay.
I tried to turn it on, but it wouldn't let me.
Yeah, technology. Okay, there we go, we're learning. Oh yeah, so you've got a beautiful color story happening there. I love your shapes. The background ones especially. So you're very much at that building form and detail stage, and they overlap with each other. Did you have any specific questions?
I just seem to be more expressive than detailed. I have trouble once I hit the details. My painting seems to fall apart.
Yeah, I think this idea of working large to small is a really helpful way to go about it, because you can decide how many details you want to add. But it is figuring out what your comfort level is. There are some really amazing artists out there that paint beautiful large passages of shape and don't worry about adding those fine details. So there's figuring out what you're comfortable with as well. Having that strength to paint those strong shapes is a really good skill. Everything else gets to be built on top of that. So I would encourage you to feel really good about it. It is a little bit of kind of finding your way through the weeds. Rochelle, I'll let you, are you muted still? No, maybe not. Oh, you've got a background set, so it might not want to show your painting. You might have to fiddle with your background settings. I'm kind of seeing part of it.
Sorry. Do you know how I turn that off?
You have to, there's a little arrow beside your video icon. I think if you go up onto, if you click on that little arrow, it'll give you options. I'll come back to you.
Okay.
I'll let you mess with it when you're not feeling under pressure. Joe, I'd love to see yours, but you'll have to turn your camera on before I can spotlight you on the screen. There we go. Now where's the spotlight option?
Okay, there you go.
There we go. Okay, go ahead. Oh yeah. Well, I think I love the gold in the water. It's so interesting because the reflections in the water tell a story. They tell us what's in the background or in the sky, even when we can't see it. So I love the way the glow in the water echoes the background. And yeah, your tree, the form of your tree is coming together really well as well. I think you've got a lot of form and depth in your painting. Did you have any specific questions about it?
Just the blue. I'm having real problems with the bloom with the sort of. Whenever I'm painting, I'm finding that I'm just putting too much water on, or I don't know.
Yeah, my feeling is probably that you're having the same issue that I was having, is that when you're adding water to, like adding fresh brush strokes and water to your painting, if your brush is quite wet, but you're right beside a part of your painting that's starting to dry, then those two things aren't balanced. And so then that's when you get those blooms. So if I want things to be smooth, I try to equal what's on my brush with what's on the paper beside where I'm going to be painting. So that's something you'll get better at being able to judge, I think, over time. But it works really well for creating depth in your painting, actually. It's working.
Yeah. Thank you very much. It's been so fun.
Oh, good. Okay, Rochelle, I can see your background now, so we're good. I'll put you on spotlight here. Go ahead. Oh yeah. So you've got a lot of beautiful contour and shape in your tree and your rock. And you've got that depth. I think one thing you'll want to work with is maybe, and we didn't spend a lot of time on the water today, but I can see maybe some shadowy reflections extending out from the right of your rock, and just moving us across the page that way. I think that'll help a lot. Yeah.
Great.
Did you have any specific questions?
No, not right now.
Good. No, I think it's working really well. I think you've got, I think one thing, and I would say probably most beginners I'm probably talking to someone who's been painting for 10 years and I'm saying beginners, but most artists who are fairly new to watercolor, I often see that there's a strong, there's a lot of darks and a lot of lights and not as much kind of in the middle. So that's a process of learning to evaluate your values. And that is also something that really helps building form as well, and getting things to get that three-dimensional look. So yeah.
Great, thank you.
Valerie, go ahead. Did you have, yeah, there, I'll pop you up. Oh my, beautiful. Oh, you're a fast painter, I think. Can you raise it up just a tiny bit? Oh yeah, beautiful. Yeah, so that,
but it didn't work.
oh, I think it's working really well. You've got those middle values that give that form, and your tree looks so aged and beautiful. Absolutely, it's got full of character. So, and I like the way the shadows around the base of the tree look. They have kind of a, just with the, I mean, it's hard to tell with the video quality, but I almost feel like there's like that little Middle Earth kind of hobbity, it just has that feeling. It's that beautiful, rich depth. So that's absolutely lovely. Notice as well that Valerie's background is very soft, and all of her detail and darks are concentrated around the tree. Gorgeous.
With working with paints I haven't used before, which is a bit of a challenge. So.
Well, I can see you're experienced in watercolor. That's beautiful.
Good to see you again, Angela.
Thank you. It's really good to be back here. Yeah.
Fresh air.
Well, this has been such a beautiful painting to work with. The photograph is something that I really love. And so, of course, choosing a subject that you love is always special. This is a subject also that I know. I was on location. I took the photo. I was in that place. And then I come home and I bring my knowledge to it. And I think that brings an aspect of I will say personality, but it's not personality, it's personal. It makes it personal and makes it meaningful. And so as you think about painting your landscape, do think about this process is a process that is meant to help you convey your emotion in your painting. Even as a new painter, you can pour your love for your subject into what you're doing and trust your instincts. When you like the look of something, don't touch it again. Let that beautiful part live on your paper. And it's learning to listen to those instincts while kind of working this process and making it work for you. That's what makes this work. So thank you for being here today. I think we're going to wrap up here. But yeah, this actually, we're about half an hour over time, but we covered a lot of ground. So I do hope you'll watch the replay and, you know, paint through it again, pause it as necessary. And do go ahead, and if you're working something and you're totally stuck, send me an email, ask me about it. I'm happy to see if I can help you diagnose why you're struggling, or what you might need some guidance on. So thanks for being here today, everyone. And yeah, all the best for continued growth. Keep showing up and putting in those brush miles. Thanks, everyone.